My mom's will left everything to my sister. She didn't know I'd been paying her mortgage for 11 years in secret. We were sitting in my mom's lawyer's office on a Tuesday, for days after we buried her. It smelled like old paper and the lemon cleaner mom always hated. My sister, Chelsea, was sitting across the desk in a brand new black dress she bought specifically for the reading, acting the part of the exhausted, grieving daughter, even though she had been spoiled her entire life and lived rent-free in mom's house for 3 years without ever contributing a dime. Her 2 kids were with a sitter, and she was tightly gripping her husband's hand. I was in my blue medical scrubs. I had come straight to the office from the hospital because I work as a dialysis tech pulling 12-hour shifts just to keep my head above water. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, had known my mom for 20 years. He adjusted his glasses and read from her will, the one she had updated just last year. To my daughter Chelsea Marie, I leave my house at 1847 Elm Street and all its contents and all my savings because she has given me grandchildren and has always stayed close to home. To my daughter Lauren, I leave my wooden jewelry box and my love, knowing she has built a successful life of her own in the city and does not need anything from me. Chelsea squeezed her husband's hand harder and looked over at me with this soft, patronizing, pitying look. The kind of look that said, "Oh, you got the old jewelry box." I didn't cry, and I didn't yell. I just stared at the framed photo on the lawyer's mahogany desk, feeling the air completely leave my lungs. Mr. Abernathy simply transferred the deed and the estate paperwork to Chelsea without ever pulling the current property records or discussing the active mortgage, allowing my sister to arrogantly assume the house was completely free and clear. But the house was not paid off. The house was exactly $92,417 away from being paid off, with a massive balloon payment due in 94 days. I knew the exact dollar amount because I was the one who had been secretly paying the mortgage for the last 11 years. It started when I was 27. Dad died of a sudden heart attack out in the garage, and Mom called me a month later, absolutely sobbing because the bank had sent a foreclosure warning. She was 62, living on fixed Social Security, and Dad had secretly refinanced the house 2 years prior to fix a rotting roof and buy himself a new truck. It was a predatory 15-year mortgage, $1,387 a month. She couldn't afford to pay it. "I'll lose the house, Lauren," she had cried into the phone. "I'm going to lose your father's house." I was a newlywed back then, living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in Des Moines, making $19 an hour. Chelsea was 22, living in Mom's basement with her boyfriend, working 2 days a week at a boutique. Mom explicitly told me she didn't want to worry Chelsea with the financial stress because her youngest daughter was so sensitive. So I did what older sisters are always expected to do. I absorbed the burden. I called the mortgage company and set up a recurring automatic ACH payment directly from my checking account. Every 15th of the month, $1,387 vanished from my bank. I told Mom it was an automatic state relief program for widows. She fully fooled herself, leaning entirely into the comfortable lie and refusing to look closer at the paperwork because pretending was so much easier than facing reality. That automatic payment never stopped. For 11 years. $1,387 multiplied by 132 consecutive months. $183,084. I did the math once at 2 in the morning while my husband and I were screaming at each other about our credit card debt. My husband, Mark, packed his bags and left me after year 4. He stood in our hallway and said, "You are paying your mother's mortgage while we can't even afford a down payment on a house of our own. You're choosing them over us." He wasn't wrong. We never had kids because I couldn't afford to stop working my 12-hour shifts. I never told Mom the truth, and I never told Chelsea. Mom would brag to her church group, saying, "Lauren is so successful in the city. She doesn't need anything from us." Meanwhile, Chelsea would post aesthetic pictures of the living room every December with the caption, asterisk, "So blessed to be home for the holidays at Mom's cozy house." Asterisk. The cozy house I was bleeding to pay for. 2 years ago, Mom called me, practically singing into the receiver. The bank sent a letter saying the house will be all paid off next year. That widow program is such a blessing, Lauren. I didn't have the heart to tell her that the original loan had a 13-year low payment structure followed by a massive balloon payment. Dad had signed it without understanding it, and Mom never read a single page of it. I planned to sit her down and tell her the truth after she recovered from her cataract surgery. But then she got sick, and then she died. So there I was in Mr. Abernathy's office. Chelsea was crying real tears, wiping her eyes and whispering about how hard Mom worked to keep the family home. I had the proof right there in my pocket. I could have pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and demanded that the estate reimburse me my $183,084. If I did that, Chelsea would be forced to immediately sell the house just to pay me back. She had 2 young kids, a husband who detailed cars for minimum wage, and less than $500 in her savings account. They would be out on the street in a month. I made a choice. I signed the legal waiver stating that I accepted the jewelry box in full satisfaction of my inheritance. Inside the box was a tarnished silver locket and 3 broken earrings. Chelsea hugged me tightly on the sidewalk outside the law office. "I know Mom left you the jewelry because you're more sentimental than me," she said, completely blind to my reality. "This must be so incredibly hard for you. But don't worry, Lauren, we'll keep the house and the family forever. The kids are going to grow up in those bedrooms. You should call the mortgage company," I said quietly, "just to make sure all the paperwork is transferred into your name." She laughed a light, airy laugh. "Lauren, it's paid off. Don't be silly." I got in my car, drove back to Des Moines, and waited. For 3 months, I watched my bank account. There was no pending automatic withdrawal. For the very first time in 11 agonizing years, I woke up on the 15th of the month, and I actually had an extra $1,387 sitting in my checking account. I bought myself a new pair of work shoes. I finally got the grinding brakes on my car fixed. I felt sick with guilt over how good it felt to breathe. On a Thursday night in February, exactly 89 days after the will reading, there was a violent, frantic pounding on the front door of my tiny apartment. I opened it, and Chelsea was standing in the hallway, completely hyperventilating. Her face was red and streaked with mascara. Her husband was standing right behind her, looking pale and terrified. She shoved a crumpled piece of certified bank mail into my chest. "They say we owe $92,000, she screamed, her voice echoing down the apartment stairwell. "They say there is a balloon payment due on Tuesday, and they are initiating a foreclosure. Lauren, Mom said it was paid off. Mr. Abernathy gave us the deed." I didn't yell, and I didn't argue. I turned around, walked over to my small laminate desk, pulled out a thick, heavy accordion folder, and dropped it onto the kitchen counter. I opened the flap and pulled out a massive stack of 132 physical bank statements, sliding them across the counter toward her. "What is this?" she choked out, her hands shaking as she looked at the towering stack of paper. "That is your cozy Christmas house," I said. Chelsea looked down at the top page. Then she flipped to the next one, and the next one. Every single page showed a cleared transfer of $1,387 from Lauren M. Ellis to the mortgage lender. Month after month, year after year, through every missed vacation, through my divorce, through 11 years of silent, suffocating debt. I didn't give a speech. I stayed completely silent, letting the sheer physical weight of the paperwork do the emotional storytelling. I watched the realization slowly break her in real time, the color draining from her face as she finally understood that she and her children had been living safely inside my sacrifice for over a decade. She looked up at me, her mouth open, unable to form a single word. I looked my sister in the eye and delivered the most honest, devastating sentence of my entire life. "It's your house now." I reached out, gently pushed her back into the hallway, and closed my apartment door until the deadbolt clicked. I heard later from a cousin that Chelsea tried to contest the will, but dropped it the second her new lawyer looked at the payment history. She and her husband had to take out a predatory, high-interest loan just to cover the balloon payment and keep the property. They had to rent out the basement to a stranger, and her kids now share a single bedroom. Last month, I put a down payment on a tiny, 2-bedroom house of my own. When I sat at the closing table and signed the deed, I thought of Mark, realizing that he was right all those years ago, and I was finally closing the loop on the life I had broken. The very first mortgage payment came out of my account on the 15th, $1,102. Yesterday, I carried my last cardboard box into my new kitchen. I unpacked my silverware, opened Mom's wooden jewelry box, and took out the tarnished blue locket. I didn't put it around my neck. I quietly set it inside the dark kitchen drawer and slid it shut, finally experiencing what it feels like to build a life that belongs only to me.